The night sky above Earth looked calm, filled with countless stars that had watched silently for billions of years. To the people below, it was another ordinary night, filled with traffic lights, quiet homes, and restless dreams, but far beyond the reach of human eyes, past the orbit of Neptune, something vast moved with unnatural grace. It was not a comet, nor a drifting rock. It was a fleet, hundreds of enormous black ships gliding through the cold, dark void without a sound. They carried no lights, no signals, only the stillness of predators waiting for the right moment to strike. They had traveled across endless light years, crossing empty galaxies. And now they had reached a place the universe had whispered about but never feared. Earth. The aliens had been watching humanity for years in secret. From distant probes hidden in the asteroid belt, they had measured Earth's weapons, counted its armies, and listened to its transmissions. What they saw convinced them of one thing: humanity was weak. Humans were divided by borders, lost in politics, distracted by their own greed. To the aliens, Earth was not a challenge, but a resource. Its oceans, its minerals, and even its population were nothing more than prizes waiting to be claimed. Other civilizations had fallen quickly under their rule, crushed before they had a chance to resist. The aliens expected nothing different here. It began slowly, almost invisibly. Satellites orbiting Earth suddenly blinked out, one after another, as if someone had erased them from the sky. At first, scientists believed it was a glitch, maybe a solar flare or natural interference. But then communication networks began to fail. Entire regions of the planet lost signals. Airplanes went blind in the skies, ships drifted without guidance, and the internet stuttered into silence. No one could explain how so many systems failed all at once. The government scrambled to cover the truth, but rumors spread faster than lies. Something unnatural was happening, and fear began to grow. In a quiet observatory in Chile, a lone astronomer stared at the data on her screen. She had tracked faint movements far beyond Neptune for weeks, thinking they were nothing more than drifting ice. But the patterns were too perfect, too controlled. The objects moved like hunters circling their prey. Her hands trembled as she checked the numbers again. Realizing that the objects were not random, they were ships, hundreds of them, moving closer each hour. She tried to alert her superiors, but the signals failed before her warnings could reach them. Somewhere, something was deliberately cutting the line between Earth and the stars. Humanity was being blinded before the attack even began. On the streets of major cities, strange lights flickered in the night sky. Some thought they were meteors, others believed they were drones. Videos spread online showing enormous dark shapes blocking out the stars, silhouettes too massive to be anything human-made. The world watched in terror, but governments denied everything. Military forces were quietly placed on alert. Jets scrambled into the skies, and submarines dove deep into the oceans. Yet no one could say what they were truly preparing for, because no one wanted to believe that something beyond Earth had finally come. The first direct sign came not from the sky, but from the airwaves. Across every television, radio, and digital screen, a message suddenly appeared. It was not in one language, but in all languages at once. Every word translated perfectly into the mind of the listener. The message was cold, stripped of emotion, and impossible to ignore. You are not ready. You are not worthy. Prepare for your end. The words struck like thunder in every household, from the smallest villages to the tallest cities. Panic erupted. People screamed in the streets, prayers filled the air, and armies stood frozen in disbelief. Humanity had waited centuries for proof of other life, but the proof that arrived was not one of peace or friendship. It was a declaration of destruction, and yet beneath the fear, a strange silence followed. The alien fleet did not fire. Ships did not descend. They only waited in the darkness beyond the edge of vision, as though they were testing humanity, measuring the response. It was a game to them, a cruel amusement before the storm. Humans were trapped between dread and denial, uncertain if the threat was real. yet feeling in their bones that something had already changed forever. The skies above Earth no longer belonged to mankind. In hidden command centers across the world, generals whispered to each other about the unthinkable. Secret defense projects buried since the Cold War were quietly reactivated. Old bunkers were reopened, experimental weapons brought online, and satellites armed with weapons that had never been tested. Humanity was weak in the eyes of its enemy, but the spirit of survival had already begun to burn. No one knew what was coming next, but one truth had become clear. Earth was no longer alone, and far out in the cold void of space. The alien fleet watched in silence. Their patience was endless, their power absolute. They believed the battle was already won before it had even begun. They believed humanity would break as easily as the others. But in their arrogance, they did not yet understand the fire they had awoken. The world did not sleep after the message. Streets were filled with restless people staring at the skies, searching for answers in the darkness above. Governments tried to calm the storm with promises and speeches, but every voice sounded hollow. Everyone knew that something beyond imagination had arrived, and that the message was not a mistake. Some whispered that maybe it was a warning, a chance to prepare. Others believed it was already too late. Humanity waited in a silence more terrifying than any explosion, silence that felt like the pause before thunder. The first strike did not come with a roar, came quietly like a thief in the night. In the early hours of morning, the satellites that had survived the first blackout suddenly turned against their masters. Instead of transmitting data, they poured noise into Earth's networks. GPS signals twisted into nonsense, military communications filled with ghost voices and false commands. Fighter jets scrambled from their bases only to crash into the ocean or collide in midair, chasing targets that were never there. Submarines went silent at the bottom of the seas, their crews cut off, surrounded by the crushing dark. Nuclear silos, the very heart of Earth's deterrence, became frozen. Their codes scrambled beyond recognition. The aliens had not fired a single weapon, yet the world's defenses were falling apart. Panic spread across command rooms as generals shouted orders to soldiers who could no longer hear them. The greatest armies of Earth had been blinded and muted in a single breath. To the aliens, this was nothing more than sport. They were hunters, who enjoyed watching their prey run in circles before the kill. Their ships moved silently in formation, still waiting just beyond the edge of human vision. In cities below, chaos erupted. Without satellites, entire power grids began to collapse. Air traffic control failed, and planes vanished from the skies. Banks froze, communications died, and hospitals lost their systems. Civilization, so proud of its technology, was being unmade piece by piece. To ordinary people, it felt like the end of the world had already begun. Crowds filled the streets, some in anger, some in prayer, some simply lost. Fires burned in the night as riots broke out. Humanity's strength was not its weapons, but its fragile unity, and now even that was being torn apart. But in the shadows of this chaos, something else stirred. Hidden inside bunkers deep under mountains, secret projects that had been buried, for decades came alive once again. Weapons designed in secrecy during old wars were reactivated. Experimental railguns, stored away because they were too dangerous, were dragged into position. Drones guided by artificial intelligence were released into the skies, operating independently of broken networks. Hackers worked furiously to tear apart the alien code that had infected Earth's systems, searching for cracks in the impossible wall. Humanity had been caught off guard, but it would not go down without a fight. The first act of resistance came from the sea. In the Pacific Ocean, an American submarine that had been cut off from all contact rose quietly to the surface. The crew, realizing they had no way to receive commands, decided to act on their own. Using old manual targeting systems long considered obsolete, they launched torpedoes at a shadow moving beneath the water. The explosion tore open the ocean, and for the first time, alien technology was wounded. A massive dark shape rose out. Of the waves, a creature-like vessel with glowing veins of light, screaming in frequencies that shook the air. The crew cheered for a brief moment before the ship retaliated. The The submarine vanished into fire and foam. The message was clear. The invaders were not untouchable. News of the encounter spread through whispers and stolen transmissions. Around the globe, soldiers and civilians alike realized the same truth. The aliens might be powerful, but they could bleed. They could be hurt. The thought ignited something ancient in the human spirit, something stronger than fear. Humanity had always fought when it was cornered. Now it was more cornered than ever before. Still, the aliens pressed their advantage. More ships appeared. In the upper atmosphere, blocking the stars with their monstrous silhouettes. They hovered above Earth's great cities, like shadows of doom. Yet they did not strike immediately. They wanted humanity to drown in its own despair, to collapse before the final blow. It was arrogance. Arrogance had always been the weakness of conquerors. In a secret lab beneath the frozen wastes of Siberia, scientists uncovered the first real clue. They discovered that the alien ships were not built of cold metal alone, but of living tissue fused with machinery. The vessels were alive, and like all living things, they could be infected. Viruses, weapons of the smallest scale, might succeed where missiles failed. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to light the first sparks of organized resistance. The world was on the edge of destruction. Cities burned, armies stumbled, and fear consumed billions of hearts. But in hidden places, humanity began to prepare for a war unlike any it had ever fought. The first strike had shown the invaders' power, but it had also revealed their arrogance. They believed humanity was already defeated. They believed the fight was over before it had begun. They were wrong. The world had changed in only a few days. Cities that once glowed with light now lay in partial darkness. The internet, once the heartbeat of civilization, was broken into fragments. Air travel had nearly ceased, and trade across nations had slowed to a crawl. Humanity stood on the edge of collapse, not because the invaders had fired all their weapons, but because the very systems humanity had built to feel powerful had turned fragile in their hands. The aliens had exposed the truth. Humans had become too dependent on their own machines, and yet in that weakness, a new strength began to take shape. The invaders saw a dying world. But beneath the ruins, something they could not measure was rising. The first sparks of resistance did not come from presidents or generals. They came from the shadows, from the unknown corners of the world where ordinary people refused to surrender. In abandoned subway tunnels under New York, engineers and hackers gathered around stolen generators, building crude systems that could bypass the alien interference. In the deserts of the Middle East, groups of soldiers who had once fought each other now fought side by side, using old vehicles and weapons to strike alien drones. In Europe, scattered militias used forests as their shield, learning how to move unseen beneath the silent watchers in the sky. Humanity was broken, but not beaten. The aliens did not expect such defiance. They had conquered other worlds before, worlds with great armies and powerful cities. But those worlds had fought head-on, trying to match force with force, and they had all fallen. Humanity was different. Instead of collapsing, people adapted. They refused to fight like soldiers in formation. They fought like ghosts, appearing and vanishing, striking where the enemy was weakest. They used every scrap of knowledge, every piece of history. Ancient guerrilla tactics were reborn in the Age of Stars, and the invaders struggled to understand. This chaos, the first true victory of the resistance, came in South America. Deep in the jungle, an alien patrol ship had landed to harvest resources. Its hull shimmered with strange organic metal, pulsing like the skin of some giant beast. The aliens moved with confidence, scanning the area, certain that no human technology could touch them. But waiting in the shadows was a group of locals armed with nothing more than rifles, explosives, and courage. They did not attack the ship directly. Instead, they used the jungle itself. Traps of falling trees, hidden pits, and old dynamite wired to crude switches turned the land into a weapon. When the ship tried to lift off again, it was struck by a homemade rocket wobbling into the trees. Fire consumed it, and for the first time, humans captured a living alien. The creature was unlike anything Earth had seen. Its body was tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shift in color under the light. Its voice was a series of sharp clicks, but through stolen translation devices, the resistance learned enough. The aliens did not call themselves conquerors. In their language, they were harvesters. They saw worlds as farms, species as crops. They had no interest in peace or alliance. To them, humanity was simply another harvest waiting to be collected. That truth spread like fire through the resistance networks. Now the fight was not only for survival, it was for freedom from being reduced to nothing more than cattle. Hackers soon discovered something even more valuable. The alien ships communicated through signals that were both digital and biological, a strange fusion of machine and life. At first it seemed impossible to interfere. But then a group of scientists in Japan realized the weakness. If the ships were alive then, like any living thing, they could be infected. A virus carefully engineered could spread into the very veins of the ships and confuse their systems. It was a dangerous idea, untested, but it gave the resistance a weapon that could level the battlefield. Small programs were written, tested on fragments of alien tech scavenged from crash sites. Slowly, the impossible began to feel within reach. The aliens felt the first tremors of this change when one of their patrol ships suddenly fell from the sky over Africa. It had not been struck by missiles or cannons. Its systems had simply collapsed mid-flight, its organic circuits twisting into chaos, as if a disease had eaten it alive. The crash shook the ground, and the villagers who witnessed it cheered louder than any army. The invaders, for the first time, felt confusion. They had expected resistance to crumble, but instead, it was growing like wildfire, and yet not all victories came from science or weapons. Something deeper was happening among the people of Earth. Old rivalries began to fade. Nations that had once refused to share secrets now traded knowledge freely. Soldiers who had once called each other enemies now stood shoulder to shoulder. Humanity was learning a lesson that the aliens could never understand. Survival required unity. For the first time in history, Earth began to act as one planet, not as broken pieces. Still, the danger remained overwhelming. For every alien ship that fell, 10 more waited above. For every small victory, cities still burned and millions still suffered. But in the shadows, hope had taken root. And hope, once planted, was harder to kill than any army. The invaders could not calculate it, could not predict it, could not erase it. The aliens believed they were facing only weapons and numbers. They did not realize they were facing something far older, far more dangerous. They were facing the human spirit, sharpened by desperation, fueled by rage, carried by the will to survive at any cost. And far above the planet, in the silent fleet that watched from the stars, alien commanders began to whisper among themselves. For the first time, they felt something unfamiliar, something they had not known in countless conquests. It was not respect. It was not fear. It was doubt. The war had dragged into weeks, and Earth was scarred like never before. Whole cities had gone dark, their lights stolen by the silence of alien control. Oceans carried the wrecks of ships that had fallen victim to strange weapons. Forests burned endlessly where battles had raged, and the skies themselves seemed haunted by shadows of vast alien vessels. Yet in this grim silence, humanity had begun to breathe differently. The fear that had once strangled every heart was slowly being replaced with something sharper defiance. Across the globe, whispers turned to courage, and courage turned to action. Humanity was not only surviving, it was preparing for its first real strike. Resistance networks had grown into something greater. What began as scattered groups of hackers, militias, and scientists now formed a single hidden web that stretched across continents. They did not need satellites or official command centers anymore. They relied on stolen frequencies, old radio lines, and even messengers on motorcycles to connect one group to another. They had learned that unity did not require perfect technology. It required will. And in this unity, the first global strategy was born. Humanity would not only hide in shadows or strike from forests, For the first time since the invasion began, humanity would rise into open battle. The plan centered on the moon. For days, Resistance astronomers had tracked unusual alien activity there. Several massive ships hovered near its surface, harvesting minerals and constructing strange machines. It was clear that the invaders wanted to turn the moon into a forward base, a perfect platform to control Earth below. If they succeeded, the war would be over in weeks. But if humanity could strike first, if they could bleed the enemy in space, then the war would change forever. To fight in space seemed impossible. Most of Earth's fleets were crippled, its rockets outdated compared to alien technology. Desperation breeds invention. Old rockets were pulled out of museums in storage, refitted with modern engines and weapons. Experimental railguns, once considered impractical, were mounted on makeshift platforms. Satellites that had survived the first wave were repurposed as weapons, filled with explosives and set to ram. Even old space shuttles were stripped, rebuilt into crude attack crafts. It was not elegant, it was not advanced, but it was human. Humanity had always turned scraps into survival, and now it would do the same on the largest stage of all. The battle began in silence. At first, the alien ships above the moon detected only faint signals and heat signatures, too weak to consider a threat. They had grown arrogant, expecting nothing from a crippled planet. But then the first wave came, a swarm of drones, dozens of them, rising like angry insects from Earth. They carried no pilots, only programming, their tiny bodies laced with explosives. The aliens barely noticed until the first drones smashed against their hulls, detonating in blinding fire. The great black ships shuddered, and for the first time, they recoiled. Behind the drones came the rockets, crude and heavy, but filled with fury. They launched not one at a time, but in waves, a storm of fire climbing the night sky. Some were shot down by alien defenses, bursting into nothingness. But others broke through, crashing against the alien machines being built on the moon's surface. Explosions lit up the gray dust, shaking the ground as alien structures crumbled. The invaders, who had treated the moon as theirs, realized too late that humans had come to claim it back. Then came the most dangerous strike. Hidden within one of the rockets was not an explosive but a virus, a digital plague designed to infect the living circuits of alien vessels. When the rocket broke apart near one of the largest ships, the virus spread through invisible waves. The alien ship's lights flickered. Its organic hull pulsed erratically. In moments its systems began to twist against themselves, as if the vessel was fighting its own body. The great ship turned, firing wildly at empty space before collapsing onto the moon's surface in a storm of fire. The sight of that fall was broadcast secretly to resistant cells across Earth. For the first time, the world saw something that had once felt impossible: an alien warship crashing in defeat. The effect was immediate. Cheers erupted in underground bunkers, in forests, in ruined cities. Even in the darkest corners of the planet, people lifted their heads and felt hope. The invaders could be defeated. They were not gods. They were not untouchable. The aliens, however, felt something different: rage. Their fleet shifted from silent control to open war. More ships descended from orbit, surrounding Earth in tighter formations. They began striking harder, destroying anything that moved. Whole towns vanished in moments, reduced to ash by beams of impossible energy. The cost of humanity's defiance was blood, and it was paid with every passing hour. Yet the aliens had already made a mistake. By revealing their anger, they showed fear. They showed that humanity's bite had drawn real pain. The captured archives from the crashed ship revealed even more. Buried within its living circuits were fragments of memory, recordings of past conquests. Dozens of worlds, each one filled with life, had been harvested and broken. Some species had fought, some had begged, but none had survived. None except now. Humanity was the first to make the harvesters bleed. And hidden deeper still in the data was something even more shocking: signals from other enslaved species. Faint calls for help, buried beneath alien control. Earth was not alone in its suffering. Others were waiting in chains, hoping for a savior. Moon burned with the wreckage of alien machines, and Earth trembled beneath the retaliation. But in the eyes of humanity, this was more than survival now. It was the beginning of something larger. The battle for the moon was not the end, it was the turning point. Humanity had tasted victory, and victory was addictive. For the first time, in the long history of conquest, the harvesters looked upon a species that did not collapse, that did not bow, that did not surrender to fear. For the first time, they faced an enemy that fought with rage, with creativity, and with the stubborn refusal to die. And somewhere deep within the alien fleet, commanders who had once spoken of harvests and inevitability now spoke in whispers. Of danger, humanity, the weak species they had mocked, had become something else in their eyes. Something unpredictable, something dangerous. The war had only just begun. The victory on the moon had changed everything. Humanity, once broken and hunted, had now proven that the impossible could be done. For the first time, alien wreckage lay across the gray dust. And the sight of those fallen ships gave Earth the courage it had been missing. But victories never come without cost. The harvesters had responded with fury. They no longer hovered in silence above Earth. Now they descended like a storm, their black ships blotting out the sun in dozens of cities. What had once been a shadow, war of signals and sabotage, erupted into a full war of fire. The skies burned. Alien weapons, beams of blinding light tore through the air, turning skyscrapers into molten ruins. Entire blocks vanished in seconds, their people lost in flame. Oceans boiled as their massive carriers sent waves of heat crashing across the waters, sinking ships that had survived until now. Earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of the assault. Yet in that destruction, humanity's spirit only sharpened. The invaders thought fire would break them, but it only carved them into steel. Across every continent, humanity had begun to weaponize everything. Nothing was off limits. Old oil rigs in the oceans were packed with explosives and detonated. As alien ships passed overhead, high-speed trains were converted into missile platforms, their rails turned into launch systems. Even asteroids in near orbit, once useless rocks, were targeted and nudged by repurposed rockets, set on a slow but deadly path toward the alien fleet. Earth itself became a weapon. Every desert, every ocean, every mountain was turned into a trap waiting to be sprung. The greatest symbol of this desperate unity was the creation of the Earth Defense Alliance. Nations that had once fought bitterly now placed their differences aside, forced into a single command structure. Soldiers wore no flag except the planet itself. Scientists from rival powers shared secrets that had once been locked away. Hackers from across the world linked into one vast underground network, sharing tools and viruses faster than the aliens could react. Humanity had been divided for centuries, but the harvesters had given them something no leader could achieve: a single enemy to unite against. The first battle of this new alliance came above the Atlantic Ocean. Alien carriers descended in formation, preparing to unleash destruction on coastal cities. Waiting for them was not an army of jets or fleets of warships. Instead, hundreds of drones rose from the waves, guided by artificial intelligence and loaded with warheads. At the same time, old submarines launched missiles from hidden positions. The sea exploded into chaos. For hours, the sky was filled with fire, as drones swarmed the alien ships like furious insects, some burning away in seconds, others striking true. 2 great carriers fell, crashing into the ocean in towers of flame that boiled the waves around them. The cost was heavy. Half the drones and every submarine were lost, but humanity had struck another wound into the enemy's pride. Yet the harvesters did not stop. They had faced resistance before on other worlds. Their strength was endless, their patience eternal. They brought more ships into orbit, surrounding Earth so tightly that even the stars seemed caged. And from above, they prepared their final weapon, a doomsday strike designed not to harvest, but to burn, to erase humanity completely. The invaders had decided that Earth was too costly to control. It would be destroyed and left as ash. On the ground, humans sensed this coming storm. Entire cities dug into the earth, turning subway tunnels into bunkers. Massive cannons were built in secret bases, railguns so large they stretched across mountain ranges. Every remaining satellite was armed, programmed to ram into enemy ships when the time came. Even civilians played their part, building traps, hiding supplies, or carrying messages through broken networks. Humanity knew that the next battle would not be for victory, it would be for survival itself. The war escalated into a level of destruction that history had never known. Skies blackened with smoke, seas churned with fire. The earth shook with impacts as alien weapons scarred the planet's surface. And yet through it all, humans refused to surrender. They fought in ruined streets, in burning forests, in collapsing cities. They fought with rifles, with hacked drones, with stolen alien tech turned against its makers. They fought because there was no choice left. Then came the boldest move of all. Using stolen fragments of alien wormhole technology, scientists devised a desperate plan. Instead of only defending Earth, humanity would strike into space itself. Wormholes were unstable, deadly, and impossible to control. But if they could open one near the alien fleet and pull them into chaos, it could turn the war. The risk was enormous. It could destroy entire cities if it failed, but there was no longer room for hesitation. Humanity had chosen total war, and total war required total risk. When the wormhole device was activated above the Pacific, the sky itself seemed to tear open. A storm of light and gravity pulled at everything around. Its several alien ships, caught off guard, were dragged into the rift, vanishing into the unknown. Others managed to escape, but not without damage. For the first time, the harvesters themselves hesitated. This was not the behavior of prey. This was something else. But Earth had paid the price. The unstable wormhole collapsed in a violent blast, sending waves of destruction across the ocean and sinking entire fleets of ships, human and alien alike. Tens of thousands were lost. Still, the war raged on. Now the planet burned in full view of the galaxy. Every transmission, every scream, every act of defiance was carried across the stars. Other enslaved species, listening from their prisons, heard the voice of humanity rising through the fire. Species the harvesters had called weak had done what none before had achieved. They had turned the harvest into a war of total destruction, and the war was not finished. It was only reaching its climax. The Earth was no longer the same planet it had been when the harvesters first arrived. Its oceans boiled with wreckage, its skies carried the smoke of endless fire, and its cities had become scars of broken glass and steel. Billions had suffered, millions had been lost. Yet through the ruins, the human spirit still burned. Humanity had refused to kneel, and in doing so, they had forced the invaders into a war they had never imagined. The harvesters had come to reap another world, but now they faced something far worse than resistance. They faced defiance that would never die. The final wave of the alien fleet arrived like a storm. These were not patrol ships or harvesters of minerals. These were the war titans, the largest vessels of their kind, built to erase civilizations. In hours, they stretched across the sky like mountains of metal and flesh, their shadows swallowing entire regions. Their weapons glowed with a light that could cut through cities in a single strike. This was their answer to humanity's defiance. Not harvest, not capture, but annihilation. They would destroy Earth completely, burning away every trace of the species that had dared to wound them. But humanity had already prepared. The Earth Defense Alliance, battered and bloodied, had saved its most desperate plan for this moment. Every weapon, every trap, every stolen piece of alien technology was gathered for a single, final counterattack. The moon's surface had been rigged with explosives hidden within the wrecks of fallen ships. Railguns built into mountains aimed their barrels toward the sky. Thousands of drones swarmed in secret hangars, waiting for release. Orbiting silently above the planet were the remnants of the wormhole devices, reprogrammed for one last attempt. It was madness. It was suicide. But it was the only chance. The battle began with fire, unlike anything before. Alien titans unleashed beams that cut through oceans, boiling entire coastlines. Cities collapsed in moments as their towers fell like candles. Yet even as the earth burned, humanity struck back. Railguns fired with thunderous force, sending slugs of molten metal crashing into alien hulls. Drones swarmed like hornets, tearing at the seams of ships with explosive sacrifice. Hackers unleashed the final version of the virus, sending it crawling into the veins of the alien fleet. Some of the great titans flickered, their weapons turning against themselves, blasting their own allies in chaos. The sky became a storm of death filled with fire, smoke, and light so bright it blinded even the bravest eyes. The cost was unbearable. Entire fleets of human ships were erased. Cities that had stood for centuries weren't. Centuries vanished in flame. The earth shook as if the planet itself was screaming. And yet, humanity did not stop. They fought with everything left. Soldiers fired rifles at shadows too large to comprehend. Civilians carried supplies through collapsing tunnels. Scientists died at their machines, forcing viruses into alien networks until their last breath. Humanity's power was not in weapons. Or number sit was in the refusal to stop, the refusal to surrender. Even when surrounded by fire, at the height of the chaos, the wormhole devices were activated. The sky tore open once more, a vortex of impossible light and gravity pulling at the stars themselves. Alien titans, too massive to escape, were dragged into the rift, their screams echoing in frequencies that rattled bones. Some vanished into the void, never to return. Others broke apart, their burning remains falling like meteors across Earth's skies. The risk was total. Whole cities were swallowed by the unstable collapse, but the choice had already been made. Survival demanded sacrifice. When the light finally faded, silence returned. The once mighty fleet of the harvesters lay shattered. Some ships still drifted, burning wrecks in the sky. Others had been consumed by the wormhole's chaos. A handful retreated, vanishing into the dark void, carrying with them the memory of defeat. The earth had not been destroyed. It was broken, scarred, but alive. Humanity had done the unthinkable. Against all odds, they had survived. And then came the final message. Across every channel, every frequency, every signal that could reach. The stars, humanity spoke. It was not the voice of one nation, not the words of one leader. It was the voice of a species, united in fire. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had endured. You called us weak. You thought we would bow, that we would break, that we would vanish as the others did. But you were wrong. We are humanity. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. We fight, and when we fight, we endure. Remember this, we are still here. Fight. Words echoed far beyond Earth. Across the galaxy, enslaved species hidden in silence heard it. Those who had given up hope raised their eyes once more. Chains began to feel lighter. In places the harvesters thought forgotten, whispers of rebellion began. The fall of Earth had been expected to prove the invaders' power. Instead, Earth had become the spark of resistance for the galaxy. The harvesters had wanted to make an example of humanity. They had succeeded, but not in the way they intended. Humanity had proven that even in weakness, there was a strength no calculation could measure. Strength born of rage, of unity, of survival. A strength that turned despair into fire. The war was not over. Earth was broken, and its people carried wounds that would never fully heal. But the galaxy had changed forever. The harvesters would never again face an enemy so icily crushed. They had woken something dangerous. They had turned a fragile species into a legend, and somewhere in the ashes of ruined cities, in the silence of space, in the hearts of those who had lost everything, one truth echoed louder than any weapon. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the storm.